Oh, hey, good morning. Happy Tuesday. We are back with two amazing OPEX coaches, Brandon Gallagher, Daniel Presson. We are here with Behind the Design. Are we episode 5?
I think this is
Or
episode 5, yeah.
we're just crushing. We're just putting in the reps week over week. We have another treat for you guys. I feel like I say this every episode, but it's just because it's such an honor to be able to hang with these two and listen to the wisdom that they have to share with you. Today, Brandon is going to be taking us through peaking an athlete or multiple athletes and the differences between the two of them. And as you know, OPEX coaches are not only amazing coaches, but leaders in their community. So they both are doing awesome things all over their communities. Brandon has Coach Connect going live today, which
Yes.
is him leading a group of coaches in his local area in person, right?
Our first initial testing, we'll call it, was in person, but this one's going to be an online thing, so anybody can join in.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
So you guys are welcome to jump in on that. But
Yeah.
it is a small group, coaching, education, mentorship kind of mastermind. I don't know what we want to call it.
Basically, we built a little curriculum on, what we feel helps you. Like, my goal with this to influence the highest standard of coaching, and like that's always been the tagline of my business. And I think with that, there's a certain way you need to be as a coach, and there's things you need to learn as a coach outside of just like a lot of the businessy type stuff that gets taught. And I think, my goal with it, and Mike's goal, I guess we'll call him the co-host, but we've been working on trying to build something that when coaches come in, their sessions get better. The way they coach people gets better, which then in return makes everything else better. So we built a little curriculum based around that. And that's what we're going to be kind of diving into. And then that's going to be an ongoing thing that we add to as time goes.
Awesome. And then I know last week we got to share with you guys Daniel's presentation from Coaches Congress, which was in Sweden, which was him really sharing knowledge and encouraging a lot of other coaches in the local area that traveled from really all over, probably all over Europe, to attend that event. And if you have been following his stories, you noticed that there was a poll that went out around what you want to see more of from Daniel. And it was, in fact, interacting and collaborating with more coaches. So
Yeah.
these guys are inspiring a lot of people, a lot of coaches. I've even gotten, I have to share this with you, 2 DMs from other coaches who've been inspired to potentially start podcasts. And we've added 2 new shows to the podcast network. Last week, Spencer's show, Performance Programming Simplified, was added. And then Kayla Smith's show, which is more direct to consumer, but is just all around like playing the long game in fitness success. So be sure to check out those new shows. With that, I won't hype up our intro too much, but I'll let you guys take it away.
Let's do it. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about peaking an athlete. And what I want to kind of dive into, specifically my background with MMA, because in my opinion, I'm not just saying this because I've done it, but like I think MMA is one of the hardest, if not the hardest, sports to maintain an athlete in, because you're, on top of the fact that you're dealing with like 5 different sports in one, you're literally like essentially getting hit, with you're getting blunt force trauma every single time you train. And that's not something that's common in sports, even in like football, for example. And I know football is more consistent throughout the year, but in training and practice, you're not going that hard every single time. And fighting is one of those sports where it really is like you're fighting every single day, especially as you get close to the fight, right? So and for those of you, obviously, I've talked about this before, but with some of the guys that I've trained, some of the athletes that I've worked with in regards to MMA, they were very, very high level individuals who are, looking to their fights were career altering fights for the most part, right? Except for some of the earlier ones when I started working with Ian, for example, or some of the lower level people that I worked with, and everything's a career altering fight because it could literally be your last fight, but a lot of the fights that I was involved with were very high level fights, fighting for rankings, fighting for belts and things like that. And I say that to say that, like, there is stress that comes along with that from the fighter and the coach. There's also a lack of time to be able to make certain mistakes. So you kind of have to go into it knowing what you want to do and how you want to get this individual to where they need to be. But I think it's also important that in that process I've learned that peaking looks like different things to different people. And I think we've kind of, as coaches, gotten this idea that peaking needs to look like this insane training protocol or like this in-depth, thing we've kind of talked about, even with like the individual clients, right? Daniel and I have spoke the last few weeks about more lifestyle clients. And I think a lot of the principles remain the same. And I think not overdoing it with some of these guys is ideal, right? So what I kind of want to do today, I have a couple examples that I want to go through. One being Amanda Nunez, because I worked with her last two fights before she retired. She was actually supposed to fight this past weekend, but her opponent got injured, so ended up not having that fight. But the last two fights I worked with her were very, very big fights for her. The first one being against Juliana Pena when she, and if you guys watch MMA, that was a pretty big deal when Amanda lost to Juliana the fight before. But she was going through a lot of stuff, and when me and her kind of got connected, she explained the whole thing that was going on at her former gym, and there's just a lot of things she needed to fix. She was injured, she was just overtraining, she had this mentality, not only like a Brazilian mentality, but she had like an MMA fighter mentality where it's just like, if some is good, more is better. And it really it lasts for a little bit in fighting. Like, you can have that mindset and get places, but eventually that stuff catches up to you. Cause like I said, essentially every kick, every punch, every takedown, every round of sparring, every round of train, like it just beats on your body, and it's a very unforgiving sport. So Amanda, being the type of individual she is, was essentially fighting a fight every single time she trained. And that catches up to you after 15 years of fighting nonstop to basically get where you need to be. And what I want to do, let me preface this by saying I want to talk about these three different people because Amanda, Ian, and Ariane Lipsky, they're three different examples of like how a fighter wants to be peaked and how I think they need to be peaked, right? So just to kind of get back into what I was saying about Amanda, her last two fights were very big fights for her, right? The first fight with Juliana was a huge camp change. She literally left the gym she had been at for, I think, her entire career, which basically got her to that first belt, and then everything after that up until that loss, and then transitioned into building her own space, hiring her own team, developing her own training schedule and system and whatnot. So it was a big change, right? It was excitement, it was change, but there was also things that were accounted into that needed to be fixed, inside of her training, inside of her mindset, that sort of thing. I'm going to kind of skip past the beginning and just kind of show you what the last 4 weeks for her looked like, because realistically, with the fighters that I work with, a lot of the principles that I use for the everyday individual still are maintained in like that quote unquote off season, right? And this is why fighting is one of the most difficult sports to deal with, because your off season could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 months, it could be a year. Like you don't really know. So the thing with MMA is you want to create recovery, but also create the ability to transition on, a moment's notice. And we'll get into that, with a couple examples with Ian, because Ian was someone who was different from Amanda, whereas Amanda got to a point where she was fighting for belts pretty consistently, right? But she picked the date, and it was like, I'm going to fight in July, and then maybe I'll fight in December. If not, I'll fight in July. Like, there was no whereas Ian was coming up in the rankings, and he was like, cool, I'll take a fight. Cool, I'll take a fight. Oh, you need me? I'll take a fight. Oh, you need me to fight the number 3 ranked? I'll take a fight, right? And that is awesome, right? But for me, that was a little bit stressful at times, because it's like, all right, cool, I got this whole thing planned. And he's like, cool, I'm fighting in 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, so we got to like change everything up. But having that ability to transition from off camp to in camp and have it go smoothly, it requires just a little bit of understanding of the individual, but also like kind of building it into the program. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about how I can do that today. So we're going to first dive into, let me pull this
just
up
a question
here.
on
Yeah, what's up?
just so I make sure I get how it works in the teams. how many other coaches do you relate to? Let's say you have a sport-specific coach, or and you're responsible for kind of energy systems training or the strength and conditioning part. How does it work? Like just your role in that setting?
Yeah, it's different. It's different from person to person. And I think like I've had a unique experience that I don't think a lot of coaches have had in regards to I've been a part of I've been a part of fighters who I've never met their coach. I've
Yep.
been a part of camps where like I'm literally sitting there with the coach watching. And then I've also had experiences like with Amanda where it's like, I'm talking to the coach every once in a while, checking in, that sort of thing. You know, and we'll talk about like an average, and then we'll talk about some of the experiences I've had. On average, you're dealing with a jujitsu coach, and this is the fighter, right? So the fighter is going to usually have a jujitsu coach. They might have a wrestling coach. They'll have like a striking coach, and that could be like specifically kickboxing or Muay Thai, or that could be like boxing, right? You could have both, or you could have one. Then you're going to have a strength conditioning coach, and then on top of that, you might even have like a head coach who's not really doing anything else besides like game planning, right? And that tends to change. There are coaches who do a lot of those. There's coaches who are MMA fighters who cover a lot of those things for you. The thing with MMA that's a lot different than like team sports, for example, is they almost like train like a team, right? Because there's a couple huge gyms in the US right now. There's Killcliff and ATT, which is in South Florida, and that's where I was for a while. So I was connected with both those gyms. And those are, ATT is where Amanda used to train. You got people like Kayla Harrison, Jorge Masvidal, Dustin Poirier, one of my other clients, Christoph Jocko. There's a lot of high level talent that trained out of there. Joanna Jacek, like a lot. Killcliff is an all male gym, so they don't allow females to train in there. So it's just like a male MMA gym. That's where you got like Michael Chandler, Kamaru Usman. One of my clients, Paul Hughes, trains out of there. You got people like, who else? Who are some bigger names people might know? Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of like big name individuals out of there that train. And now like the gyms like ATT and Killcliff, they kind of have coaches that they hire, and they'll have like an in-house strength conditioning, an in-house nutritionist, an in-house jujitsu coach, striking coach, that sort of thing. And that's kind of the deal with it. And how those usually work is like the fighter comes in, they'll sign a contract. When they do fight, they're like they pay a percentage of their pay, and then that kind of gets dispersed around the coaches. And those environments can be good. Sometimes they can be bad because those coaches get overworked, and there's not a ton of individualism that you're going to get, or individualized coaching that you're going to get in that environment, unless you're one of the like very high level athletes. So it can be tough, right? I've also had other experiences with like Amanda where she hired her own team. So that was me as a strength conditioning. She had a wrestling coach. She had not a jujitsu coach, but she had somebody she worked with for jujitsu that was like more of a training partner. She had a head coach, and then that was really it, as far as I'm aware. And then I had someone like Ian, right? And where Ian was definitely a different example, I'll put it that way. I was the strength conditioning coach. He had his nutritionist, and that was really the only set thing he had outside of like his head coach, who is Diego Lima. He has kind of settled into Damian Maya as his jiu-jitsu coach, but that was that was a while before he actually like kind of had some people set. Now I know he's got some like a full team, and like a striking coach and whatnot, and everybody that's kind of set. So like I said, it's a little bit different, right? I also have one client, Ariani, who her husband is also her head coach, but he kind of covers everything and oversees everything. So he's a black belt in jujitsu. He's a high level Muay Thai fighter. He has fought himself, so he kind of like manages the situation while also overseeing a lot of that. So she has like one coach that covers everything, and he kind of brings in the training partners and decides like who's best for what opponent, that sort of thing, and she fights. So it kind of long-winded answer, but there's a lot of different ways it goes in MMA. I would say the most average way is someone trains out of a fight gym, and all that stuff's kind of like there that they have access to. But it's not as in depth as if you're working with like an individual like myself for strength conditioning or any of the other things, So I think the screen. Can you guys see the screen right now, or is it not being shared?
I can't see right now.
No.
No.
Let me see it. Oh, there we go. Cool. So I'm going to quickly run through this. Now, I just want to preface this by saying I was using a different platform before this, so I don't know if everything transferred over 100% when I switched to Coach RX. But with Amanda, so we were about 4 weeks out. Now, I want to say with Amanda, she was definitely a different case than some of the other athletes that I worked with at the time. Reason being was Amanda was someone who wasn't she was established, like she was very established as a fighter. She has a skill level that is unprecedented inside of like MMA, right? So my job as a coach was three things. One was to make sure she was 100% healthy, right? Because Amanda is the type of fighter and individual that like when she's healthy, she is the best on the planet. And when you deal with those types of athletes, you kind of have to allow them to just do what they do best, right? And you can't put so much pressure on yourself to kind of create, you know, this insane program that's going to make them better because like I said, she was a champion before me, she's going to be a champion after me. Like that's the sort of situation I'm in. So I just want to make sure she's healthy, she's able to go out there, not second guess her body and do what she does best, right? So a very long time before we got to this point, which I'm going to start to dive into, which is basically the last 4 weeks, was basic bodybuilding. She really liked to have a like just a pump. She liked to, you know, look in the mirror and see her arms jacked up. She liked to do abs. She liked to just kind of do some basic bodybuilding with some powerlifting movements, get strong, that sort of thing, right? Now, obviously, as we get closer to a fight, you know, there's a couple specific things that we want to see, and we want to move a little bit faster. We want to start to get a little bit more dynamic. We want the conditioning, you know, intensity and volume to go up a bit, and we want to just be a little bit more careful on the side of doing anything that's going to cause us injury, because the one other unique aspect of MMA that tends to happen in regards to like program design is when we start to ramp up training, their calories are starting to become like the lowest that they are inside of their training, because they are cutting weight, they are having to lose anywhere on average to like, you know, the highest I've seen is like 30 pounds, and the lowest I've seen is like, you know, 5 to 10 pounds, right? And that's a big gap. You know, like Ian fought somebody, Jeff Neal, and he actually had the biggest weight cut and rehydration ever recorded in the UFC. He weighed in at 170, and the night of the fight he was 200 pounds. So like that's a 30-pound weight difference you're seeing in the course of 24 hours, mind you, right? That weight cut is very difficult, and when you have to deal with that in regards to lifting, you know, like, and all of us coaches, when we talk about this stuff from a, you know, a basics lifestyle point of view, fighters do everything that is basically the opposite of what we would recommend an individual do. They cut their calories, you know, they're water loading, or they're kind of cutting their water. They're not sleeping as well because the training intensity is higher. They're training, you know, 2-3 times a day sometimes. So it's a lot to manage. And in regards to the S&C job, and something that I've learned in doing this is what I write isn't always going to fly, right? And I have to be very adaptive. I have to be very aware of who's in front of me, how they're feeling, how the sessions went that day, because little things pop up, tweaks and, you know, turns, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And all this stuff pops up, and you have to be able to adapt on the fly, right? So with Amanda,
just on that,
yeah, what's up?
do you think it's is it hard to navigate? Because you also mentioned that your job was keeping them healthy, and
Yeah.
So my question is more, when we talk about like competitive athletes or sports, there's an element of it that's not connected to longevity, or we're trying to perform on a specific date, maybe on the expense of tomorrow. But there's always that other aspect of it, that if you're healthy, you're probably going to be performing better.
Mhm.
So do you think it's where do you is it hard to navigate that sometimes you need to prioritize health, and then sometimes you almost need to switch that off just to make sure you achieve certain things going into that specific date?
Yeah, 100%. I think that was one of the most difficult parts is like there's times when in the last 4 weeks when you know, because again, like in MMA, there's a fine line you have to like be aware of. And that last 4 weeks is probably the most important in training, right? And a lot of the times I ended up, because we have this idea of peaking as being like this thing where it's just a straight line and it kind of just goes and you're ready, right? And unfortunately, with a lot of the stuff, what I found out was even when I had the things planned perfectly, there was always this, and then there was this, and then there was this, and then there was like it was just up and down until we got to that point where they felt good, right? And I think that that is the question I always have to ask myself is like, okay, do I push it here or do I hold back here? Because you know, there's times when, of course, I want to push certain aspects of plyometric training or the speed work or whatever. But does that come at the expense of actual training? Because personally, and I might have a, this might be a challenge thought, like, and I would love to, get challenged on this. I think a lot of these athletes get most of that type of training that, they look for in strength conditioning inside of the sport. Right. And when we talk about actual MMA training, they're getting lactic training, right? They're getting that very burning type of conditioning. They're getting speed work. They're getting, reflex work when they're doing this sort of training. They're very heavy isometric training and like jujitsu and wrestling and that sort of thing. So it's like for me, is peaking really hitting those things again, or is it filling those buckets around that, right? Because does it make sense to have them go 5 whole rounds of sparring when you're actually fighting and training for a fight and then have them come do, max effort bike sprints after that? Not really, in my opinion, right? So with the way that I've kind of seen and laid out programming was what are they doing inside of the MMA gym? And then what do they need from me to feel their best on the night of the fight, right? What are the things that they need to come in and see that they're probably not getting, right? Longer, lighter, longer cardio, um, working on some of these smaller muscles, working on some of these kind of like we've talked about in the past, Daniel, with even like your programming, finding ways to get work done without really taxing the body any more than it already is. Because MMA is not only a physically demanding sport, but it's also a very neurologically demanding sport and can be very quickly fatiguing in like a couple weeks, right? And most of the time what I see with these athletes and especially the fighters is never like a physical fatigue as much as like a mental foggy type central nervous system fatigue that they get, right? And what I've tried to do with that as I've learned and like, with Amanda was a different story because with Amanda, what I tried to do here was just make sure she was like rising at the right time while still staying healthy. Because like I said, with someone like Amanda, the best way I can put it is like you don't need to do much, but you need to just keep her healthy, right? Because she, like I said, she's going to be the best in the world. She's proven that many times, right? The biggest thing that happened in that fight before was she wasn't healthy. She wasn't able to train at her hardest, and her conditioning wasn't there. Her physical awareness wasn't there. Her mental awareness wasn't there, and it got to her inside the fight. So my biggest thing was making sure she was enjoying training, wanting to show up every single day, making sure when she did do her MMA training, there wasn't any second guessing of her body. She was able to fully execute the game plan that she had, and she was recovering well as well. Right. So I tried to mimic that, all the stuff she was getting in training, and mimic that in the way, or almost mirror it in the way where it's like you're getting the opposite with me. Right. And I think within that, what we saw was I tried to keep things like Amanda was someone who really enjoyed, you know, I wouldn't say complexity, but she enjoyed like fun things, right? She almost got me roasted on social media because she wanted to do this Bosu ball clean thing one time. I love her, but she put me in a really bad position there. And she was someone who wanted to like try things like that and always wanted to like train fun. So that was someone I had to kind of like find that balance between, hey, we can have some fun, but like 90% of the time has got to be this, you know? Um, so as you can kind of see here, this was about I believe this is the last 4 weeks out. Yeah, this was like about 4 to 5 weeks out of her fight with Juliana the second time. So a lot of landmine work. Did you say something?
No, go ahead. It's
Sorry, I think maybe I heard an echo. But working on a little bit of actually let me dive into this first because there's a lot of stuff here that we kind of talked about already. But with a lot of this warm up work, right? We're starting from the wall to the floor was one of my ideas, and making sure that we're almost like starting assisted, working our way out into like a full dynamic warm up, working on scap, protraction, retraction, elevation, depression, covering all the aspects of the shoulder, working on these low-level plyometrics and full plyometrics. And the reason why, and this is one of those little key things if you're looking to actually peak an athlete properly, the low-level plyometrics are something that's going to keep you ready year-round in regards to like building up that capacity to transition from like, you know, normal training into any type of explosive training, or, you know, we'll call it like speed training, right? So having those plyometrics and low-level plyometrics year-round is what actually allows us to properly make that transition. Then we got into some landmine stuff. She really enjoyed the landmine. You know, again, I think a lot of us in S&C kind of get lost sometimes with the type of training we pick. And I think with some of this stuff, it's almost just as much mental as it is physical, right? We want to see physical adaptation that occurs from the athlete, but we also want them to feel like they're doing stuff that like works for them, right? And you know, with the landmine, this is something that, you know, is it the most complex thing in the world? No, but it does give you that sense of rotation. It gives you that sense of extension. It gives us some footwork, and it allows her to feel fast and feel good. Because I do think with a lot of this training stuff, as much of the physical part of it is peaking, I think the mental aspect of it is what matters a lot in regards to actually peaking as a fighter. Like, and I think fighting is such a confidence-based sport. It's like you have to walk out there and know that you're going to destroy this person, right? And I'll keep it like PG, but like you have to walk in there knowing like you're the best in the world, because any doubt of confidence or any dip in confidence is literally you know, an opening to lose, right? So it's like we need to make sure this individual is coming in feeling good, moving fast, moving smoothly, not really much of any hiccups or anything like that. And that's what allows us to find success in here, right? So,
And just like, as you know, I coach a lot of CrossFitters, and this, I think sometimes, and obviously in MMA, confidence and the psychological part comes to an extreme.
yep.
But even if I compare it to CrossFit, where you go into competition where you usually don't know what you're going to do
Yeah.
over the coming 3 or 4 days. So, and that like is obviously a stressful situation. So the last week, one thing that I usually ask my athletes is like, is there anything you need to do during this week to gain confidence? Is there something you want to, a movement you want to do, or something you just want to check during this week? What's on your wish list in terms of exercises, for example, just to make sure that confidence is, I want to boost that during the peaking phase or comp prep phase, because I believe there's a difference between a deload or a pullback week and comp prep or peaking, because they have similarities sometimes where you pull back just to manage fatigue, but a big difference in comp prep is keeping the performance in mind, and that can be just making sure getting movements and stuff in that increase the confidence of the athlete.
Exactly. And I think one of the things you just mentioned there, which is another thing, and this is something I've played around with a lot in peaking with these guys, is obviously, you know, a lot of us kind of throw around the word, you know, deload weeks and whatnot. I try to avoid them. Now I say that from a fact of I don't push through fatigue, and like if we obviously need it, I'll make those changes. But I like to build the programming so that it slowly builds up each and every week, and is manageable in that load. So within that you know, off season, it's obviously a lot of strength work, structural work, stability work, that sort of thing. So when we actually get into the fight camp, we're able to resist entropy. We're able to resist the breakdown of our body inside of training. And also because it's really hard to get stronger, you know, truly stronger when your calories are low and you're doing all this, you know, basically conditioning based training with jujitsu and striking and sparring. It's very hard to actually maximally load the body because your central nervous system's already screwed, right? So I try to get as much of that strength related stuff out of the way, you know, within, if we're in a perfect world, we're about 12 weeks out. We'll do about 2 months of, heavy lifting, about a month of kind of this like transitionary period where we're doing a little bit more power work that, we're still lifting heavy, but we're doing a little bit more in like a more explosive way, which then helps us kind of transition into these last 4 weeks where we're going to use a lot of French contrast. We're going to use a lot of isometrics, yielding isometrics, overcoming isometrics, ballistics, plyometrics, things like that, where, if you're not strong enough, you're not going to actually get the benefit of those things. And I think this is another place where people really mess up inside of like athletic training, is they think just because it's peaking, it has to be explosive and plyometrics and ballistics and throws and all this stuff. And there's a skill level to that, right? And there are prerequisites that are required for someone to, properly get the stimulus of throwing a ball as fast as they can or jumping as far as they can. Like, you need hip extension, you need rotation, you need to be able to move a certain amount of weight to then be explosive at a certain amount of weight, right? So there are prerequisites that are needed to then even get the stimulus of some of these things, right? And in MMA, it's a really unique sport because strength doesn't always win. And it's not always, hey, I'm as strong as possible, so I'm going to dominate this person. Someone like Ian, for example, is very long and lanky. He's 6'4", 170 pounds. He benches maybe 155 pounds, right? But he'll knock you out and kick you in the head in 2 seconds. And you wouldn't even know what happened, right? And it's like, that's the thing with the sport, is that you have to understand what the game plan is, who they're fighting, how they're going to fight, and translate that S&C into a peaking phase that gets them ready for that. And it's not always just, hey, let me get as strong as possible. Hey, let me lift the most amount of weight possible. Sometimes it's literally just, hey, we know what the number is that we can hit. Let's work at it. Let's move a little bit faster. Let's feel a little bit better. Let's make sure the conditioning's up. And that's what it is, right? Because for me, MMA is a very conditioning heavy sport, right? Like, the strength is always there and it does help you. But really, at the end of the day, it's how long can you execute on the game plan? And if you are familiar with MMA, or if you watched MMA at all, whether it be UFC or PFL or any of these other promotions, there's a lot of great first round fighters, people who look really good in the first round. And then the second round comes and you're like, am I watching the same fight here? Right. And the third round comes and whatever, if they even make it there. And it's because a lot of these guys are basing their stuff around explosive movements and speed and whatnot. And like, yes, that obviously helps you win fights. But at the end of the day, it's a very, aerobic sport. It's like you're having to do things for an extended period of time with very little rest. And if you're in a title fight, you're essentially moving for 25 minutes with a minute rest in between each of those rounds. So it's to me, the S&C for that comes down to how well can that, or how efficient can you be inside of that minute of rest, and how much can you recover to then do that again for multiple rounds, right? So a lot of my programming and the way that I kind of like structure everything is literally based around how can we make that 1 minute as efficient as possible when you get there, right? And there's a lot of things that occur inside of that. That's having the strength to, not have to, how do I put, like, again, if you can lift bench 185 pounds and I ask you to move 100 pounds, that's not going to be as difficult, right? Or, it's going to be kind of difficult in regards to your max. If you can bench 315 and I ask you to move 100 pounds, that's going to be less taxing on the body, right? So it's like that sort of thing comes into play, where it's like, how strong do we actually have to be for MMA? And then how much conditioning can we then fit in there so that you can execute on the game plan as long as possible? Hopefully this is making sense.
Yeah. And
Cool.
I think it's good for coaches listening to this, to remind yourself, and the discussion you touched upon, that if you are responsible for all training, and you might be both the SNC and the sport specific coach, you that's a different case. But if you are the SNC and relating to them having sport specific expression going into a fight or whatever competition they have, usually that sport specific expression goes up and they do more explosive stuff,
Mhm.
meaning you don't always need to put that into your clients or your athletes strength training, because the intensity or explosiveness and the sport specific expression is going to go up closer to the day that they need to perform. and you might not always need to put that into the program, and it comes into a broader discussion where sometimes I feel like that people they try to mimic the sport in the gym, and then the follow-up question will be, so why wouldn't you just play more sport if that was the case, that you want to mimic the sport? So as you explained, it's almost like the reversed, or a good separator is, if you look at the sport and you think about the sport, are you relating to other individuals in that setting? The setting might be quite chaotic. Might be punched in the head or tackled, or then to me, it makes more sense to keep the strength and conditioning more general. But if you have a sport where the environment is kind of fixed, if you take Olympic weightlifting, the strength training and the skill can pour more into what looks like the sport. And that's usually, if you look at what kind of sport am I, do I treat both the sport specific expression and the SNC? Yes or no? How is the sport looking? Is it a fixed environment or a varied environment or a chaotic environment? If that's the case, I might be better off just being general, get them strong and fast and well conditioned. If it's the environment is more fixed, you can start play around with taking elements and use them in the strength training, for example.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I want to dive into that you just said is like, a lot of coaches want to bring the field into the weight room, right? And they want to show that they're what they're doing translates onto the field, and look how this looks at the gym, and this is the position you're going to find in training, and like, I get it, right? And I think the biggest thing I would say to that is, I personally like to train qualities that support on the field work, but I don't want to bring the field into the weight room. That was something that one of my mentors, Jordan Shallow, kind of pinned into my head in the prescript course, was like, you don't need to bring the field into the weight room, right? You need to understand the qualities that they need. So if you're throwing a punch, right, you're going through that motion, there's internal rotation, protraction, right? So let's work on that. It doesn't mean we're going to attach a band to our fist and go like this really fast, right? Because that's not really doing anything for us. They're going to get that training with the actual technical coach that's going to teach them the things that they need to see. But we want to allow them to have the ability to fully extend their arm, fully retract their scapula, have range of motion of the scapula in all four phases. With the hip, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I know how to teach someone how to kick or knee or anything. Like, I have some experience, but I would never go that route. But let's give the athlete the ability to when they're in front of the person who can teach them, they don't have to second guess their body, right? They don't have to come back and say, I don't know if I can do that, right? Give them the ability to work on internal rotation of the hip and external rotation and flexion and extension. And that should be what programming is based around, right? And the same idea is like when we talk about peaking, a lot of the time in early programming, it should just be general, like you said, general qualities that then relate back to the athlete. And then when we start to peak, the biggest thing that I start to think about is like, what are they really good at? And let's make that as good as possible, right? Let's not kind of focus on like, because if we start to build up, if we don't utilize the pre-camp phase properly, where we're taking those weaknesses and trying to kind of get those up as high as we can every single off camp, right? Then the in camp is like, okay, we've built those weaknesses up a little bit, but this is the game plan and this is what they're really good at. Let's build that up and get that as high as we can, because that's what's going to win them the fight. Obviously that changes if there's opponents that we know or that are going to have a different game plan, or there's going to be a different level of fighting, right? And then the last thing, right, is that it really depends on the person in front of you, right? Ian was somebody who knew his body very well and was also very vocal on what he liked and didn't like, right? Amanda was somebody, and Ariani were somebody who just wanted structure and were like, hey, tell me what to do. I'm going to do it. Give me some feedback sometimes. If there's something that doesn't feel good or doesn't feel right, we change it. Ian was somebody who would come into a session and be like, I hate this. I don't really want to do this. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, let's change it for something else. Or I had to be like, listen, this is what we're doing. Like, either, deal with it, or, we'll switch it and we'll try, like, we'll figure something else out. But like, this is what I want to do for today. And I think, with some of it, it's really dependent on like, hey, you could go this entire route and go like, hey, I want to do this complete in-depth programming with all these, sets and reps and tempos. And then the person comes in after a hard training session. They're like, I don't have the mental capacity to do this. And it's your job to say, cool, let's scrap it. We can still get this done. Right. And then just kind of adjust on the fly. And in MMA, when you're in the peaking phase or any sport, CrossFit, MMA, whatever it might be, you have to be really good at understanding that part of like, I wrote this and they're telling me it ain't it, scrap it. And we're going to go do something else. Right. And you can't let your head get into that. Like, I wrote this perfect program. And if we don't do it, they're going to miss out on so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And it sucks sometimes because sometimes you do write really good workouts and you do have awesome workouts and you're like, I can't wait to do this. And then they come in and you're like, damn, I got to hold this off or I can't do this today. Right. And it's our job to fit in where we need to, and especially in this sport, and go from there. So hopefully that makes sense with some of the in-depthness of what I just, kind of got into. But quickly want to dive into a couple things here. Any questions on that, Daniel, or anything like feedback, thoughts?
No, it's like we talked about last week. Coach the person, not the program. It's you have to start with looking who's in front of you. How did you
100%.
feel, and then adjust. So makes sense.
Cool. So so again, one of the things with Amanda was just making sure she was healthy, making sure she could go to training, she could do everything that she needed. But one of the things also, when we start to peak with somebody, the volume starts to drop a lot, right? And the intensity goes up. So from what, a normal day might look like, you might see, anywhere from 3 to 6 exercises, 3 to 5 sets, whatever it might be. When we start to get into peaking phases, what you're going to see a lot from like my end of things is we're going to have some sort of like big movement or a compound movement. So we had like a farmer's carry. So essentially we were building up each set where we held for 30 seconds, then 60 seconds, then 90 seconds at the same weight. Then we, on the second day, we had a prowler push. And with Amanda, I saw her twice a week, just about. Sometimes I would see her 3 times a week, depending on how the week went with her training. But so started off with something like this. Then we went into just a quick like try set. This one was the switch foot landmine press, Smith machine barbell row, and then YTWs from a bench. So basically just working on some shoulder health, working on something like a full body movement, like the bent over row on the Smith machine, which obviously isn't as taxing as like a full barbell row, but definitely something to kind of work the back and those, what I consider to probably be the most important muscles in regards to training, like having a strong back in regards to MMA. And then just some technical work, some unique, explosive work with the switch foot landmine press, something that gets her mind moving, gets her feeling fast, explosive, and we were building on as well. I did have the weights in here, but for some reason it just says complete now. I'm not really sure why. But then at the end of that, we would always try to do some sort of like light conditioning at the end. I know this is like 15 seconds at a tough pace, but this was more about just kind of giving her a little bit of that conditioning stimulus. Sometimes at the end of the sessions, she was very like, hey, I'm pretty exhausted today. I'm not feeling that. And we would just skip it because she was training a lot at the time being. And again, a lot of times, so also to break this down with MMA and why I said I probably should have started with this. A normal week for MMA, depending on the gym you go to, is usually going to be anywhere from like, and we'll talk about like the last 4 weeks since we're getting into that. You're going to see anywhere from like 2 to 3 spars during the week. And those spars are usually 5 rounds, like 5-minute rounds, which is, imagine the fight and you're doing that 3 times in the week for 4 weeks building up to that fight, right? Most of the time, if you're having things like organized, you want anything from anywhere from like 8 to 12 spars before you fight. And some people are less, some people are more. I've had people who I fought with who just want to spar like 2 or 3 times before the fight just to make sure they got it. I also have seen people who like, once it's 4 weeks out, they do nothing but spar because that's what they feel is best. But for example, with Ian and Amanda, because they were a pretty similar schedule, Amanda would do like some sparring on Monday, or no, she would do a light technical like jujitsu on Monday or pad work. She would spar on Tuesday. She would do some more light technical pad work or jujitsu on Wednesday. She would spar again on Thursday. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday were more like light technical days. And from my experience in regards to like how I felt was the best way to kind of peak an athlete and get them to have the most amount of adaptation with the least amount of work, on those high days, we keep them high, right? So when you have a high spar, let's get a high heavy lift in, right? And on those low days where it's a little bit more technical, let's have some conditioning, right? Amanda was someone who enjoyed running. So on the days I wasn't with her peaking, she always liked to run beforehand. So what I would do is I would just have her, she would just run on her own. She would run for like 30, 40 minutes twice a week outside of that. The way I look at it is like if it's a low day and you're running nice and low, like she would just do a nice light pace that she can move for like 30 to 40 minutes. Think of like nasal breathing type deal. She could sustain it the whole time. That keeps the stress on the body low, and that allows her to recover. Then those high days where it's like, hey, we have a high central nervous system day that is very specific to MMA. Let's keep that high and let's get a nice big lift in so that next day she can fully recover. So she essentially has a full 24 hours to recover, 48 hours to recover until she has to go super hard again, right? And this was something I kind of played around with Ian, which I'll get to in a second, which I kind of learned this idea from another coach who, Corey Schlesinger, who kind of created this concept of like microdosing fitness. And I took a lot of inspiration from that and brought it into the MMA world, where instead of kind of having 2 big sessions during the week, because that was the big thing in MMA when I first learned was you basically have 2 big sessions during the week, right? In my mind, with being, again, having a experience of being with Ian in a very isolated setting where I was just training Ian, I could play around with a lot of things, and we trained almost every day, right? So instead of having these 2 big sessions during the week, what I did was I basically took those sessions and I spread them out throughout the week, right? So what would look like here with Amanda, where we had like a big movement and then we had some accessory movements and then we had conditioning, I would essentially split this up with someone like Ian, where on Monday he would have a spar and we would get the big lift in and then a couple accessory movements, and then that was it. On Tuesday, he would have light technical jujitsu. We would do light aerobic work on the bike or the row or the ski erg or something like that. He was very adamant about using those 3 pieces of equipment because he felt those were the best conditioning for him, and he didn't really like to run. Then on Wednesday, he would have another light day. So we would do another cardio day or just rest. On Thursday would be another spar. And then we would have another heavy day where we'd work on a big lift, something similar to this with some accessory work. Then we'd have another conditioning day on Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday were kind of dependent on how he was feeling. We'd either hit some accessory work or we would just hit some core work or mobility or, whatever the case may be. But with that, that gives the ability for you to still hit everything that you need during the week, but without having those 2 huge training days, which can take a lot from the athlete, especially when you're almost running on fumes at this point, right? And I know right now I'm speaking very conceptually and kind of like broad in regards to the programming, but obviously you can see kind of just a little bit of examples here with like Amanda and whatnot. But that was the sort of thing where you kind of had to play it smart with some of these guys. Otherwise, doing too much too soon would essentially run them into the ground. Any thoughts, comments on that?
It's good reminder that in general people are different. But do you track? One question I have: what do you track? Like the sessions in between in this calendar? Do you track the other work they're doing, like the sport specific stuff?
Yeah. So like I said, this was a little bit messed up because this was on when I had the other programming app. So when I transferred everything over, this wasn't as clean. Like you can see, like some of these days are doubled on here. I don't know why they're doubled. But this just didn't transfer as cleanly as it was when I initially had it. This is also from 2022 was her title fight. So some of this might not be perfectly transitioned over, but go ahead.
Yeah, so a few of the athletes that I have that I'm just S&C coach. I usually have I put a session where like I have a really good swimmer and she gets her training schedule and her swimming sessions is just titled swimming, and then she herself just puts in what they did and also a comment how did she feel, because it's easier when you also track feeling and intensity from all the other workouts. I think that's lost sometimes for S&C coaches. They just figure out like, I'm going to do this program, and quite often you're left with that whatever stimulus or mood or psychological factors or physiological. You're left with the kind of what's left after the sport specific training. So then it's quite nice to just track that, to be able to adapt and be flexible as a coach.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things to realize too is that is like I had the luxury of like I train regularly, like jujitsu, MMA, that sort of thing. So I know what it feels like to have a lot of those sessions. And I know that that might not be the normal for a lot of people, but I always plan accordingly to how I know I would feel after a
Mm.
session like that. And I had the luxury also, and I've, you know, blessed to have been able to train with Amanda, like personally, like we've done jujitsu and wrestling together, and striking stuff together. I've trained with Ian in jujitsu and striking, and Damien and the guys that he works with. So I know what it's like, and I'm dying at the end, and he's
Mm.
perfectly fine. But it's like, you know, I'm dying, I'm against the wall, just like, all right, I need a second, like that sort of thing. So I know how I feel. So I have some sort of idea of like, hey, you know, what actually would fly after a session like that, right? I'm not going to do what I'm doing and then go ask him to do a 1 rep max deadlift. Like it just doesn't make sense, right? I'm also not going to do some of these sessions and then go and ask him to do some insane cardio piece. Like I have the luxury and the experience to say, hey, I know what this feels like. I know what I would want to do in the situation and what would feel like for me. And then obviously, like you said, you build off the individual in front of you, and we ask and just figure out like, hey, how are you feeling, right? Like, how are you actually feeling after this? Because I feel like this, right? And there was plenty of times I literally trained with Ian, and then we would finish that session, clean up, go right to the gym after that. Because one of my things also with the kind of that microdosing model of fitness is trying to do it in as tight of a window as possible, so you get the most amount of recovery as possible, right? If I look at it as like, if you can start that engine less and less throughout the week, then you're gonna recover better and be ready when the time comes again, right? I'd personally rather have a little less, because some people like that time in between each session where it's like you're training in the morning and then you're training at night. But having to restart, you know, quote unquote, restart the engine twice in a day to get going, to me is like physically and mentally a lot, as opposed to being like, hey, we just did all this training. Let's just hop right in. We're already warm. A lot of things are warmed up in the body. Let's go another quick little like recap warm up and let's go right into the lift. And now you have a full 24 hours to recover, right? As opposed to like I train in the morning for 2 hours, I take like an 8 hour break, and then I train for another hour or two at night, and then I have to wake up in 8 hours and do it again, right? And that time to recover gets less and less. If we start at 8, finish at 11, get everything in, and then you start at 10 the next day, it's like you have a full 20 hours to actually recover, relax, do things with your family, you know. And that was a big thing with Ian that we found a really nice flow with, where it actually allowed him to do a lot more in his day as opposed to just like training, because he was someone who's very big on family, very big on like spending time doing the things. We were traveling a lot, so he wanted to go and see and experience things. So he was big on like, hey, let's get the, and like he it vibed with him where it's like, let's get this done, let's get all the training in, and then you have the rest of the day to do whatever. And it helped him, right? And like even in the 4 years that I work with Ian, he never missed a fight. He's never been injured. You know, knock on wood, but like he's never been injured. He's been the he's shown up for every single fight that they asked him to, whether it was a week's notice or 2 days notice or 2 weeks notice, whatever it was. And that's, to me, that's like a very, obviously like a lot of his training and his body, but then also like our training and what I did for a very long time with him to set him up to be able to transition pretty quickly. Right. And Amanda, same thing. You know, Amanda came from a background of like pain, 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 to the first time in her career being like as healthy and as strong as she possibly could be stepping into the fight. And she whooped her, she beat her up for 5 rounds. Just put it that way, right? And Amanda won. I think she had like one of the biggest round wins in the history of women's MMA, which was like a 50-42 or something like that. So basically she had like 2 or 3 10-8 rounds in that fight. And that's all, you know, conditioning based. That's all feeling healthy, moving, you know, feeling confident in your
Question
body and being
on that of trying to squeeze the or going straight into the next piece. Do
yeah.
you think it's because sometimes I feel that the strength would be when you split it up is that you get a bit of rest and then you can um, go again with more intention. Or if we say we have a long training session, sometimes that I feel that it you almost drained in terms of intention and the amount of effort you can put in psychologically when you get to like far down into your training session. Whereas if you would do a bit, have a break, and then go at it again, it would I've experienced that being for some athletes easier. Do you think there's kind of correlation with these being top level athletes and you don't get there without being good at putting the work in and having it comes more natural to have that high intention in all pieces, whereas if you maybe not at that level or struggle with kind of keep the intention up throughout a long training session, it would make sense to split it up.
Yeah, of
Do you
course.
get the question?
I think so. Maybe if I answer it, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But like with MMA, I think it can be done very easily because strength isn't a big like one of the bigger factors, right? And I think output in regards to like strength is going to be the biggest deficiency you're going to see there. Because if you, for example, you know, if I guess the way I can put it is like Ian lifting after a session or Amanda lifting after a session and 6 hours later, the percentage difference in what those are actually going to be versus the recovery, in my mind, is like the recovery is more important, right?
Yeah.
If Ian might bench 135 right directly after a session and he might bench 150 6 hours later, is that 15 pounds in regards to like the game plan and him recovering worth that, or is the recovery to then go back to training the next day and do it again consistently what's worth it, right? And I think that's the game I play or the question I ask. Whereas like CrossFit, for example, or other sports where strength is a very heavy I guess we can say metric in regards to output, that's where I think you need a little bit extra rest so that output can be had. And I think that's the only difference, really. I mean, like outside of that, I don't know if the rest matters less or more. Am I answering that correctly?
Yeah,
Like in regards to your question?
yeah, because it's basically looking at all pieces of the puzzle. Where do I get the most out of this with the recovery output, and looking at what kind of work do I want throughout the week,
Yeah.
and also how fast do I want it to recover. And
Yeah.
for some people, it might be that it's better, or it becomes too much on the expense of the output.
Mhm.
The strength might drop a lot if they do the session straight after, and for some people it doesn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you said, and I was just curious about your thoughts behind that, and kind of weighing intention and output to the benefits of recovery, and keeping an eye on that as a coach.
Yeah, and I think like in the off season, I'll definitely say this, like in the off season, I'd rather take that extra time and just get more out of the lifts, right? Because I do think like in the off season, that's when I'm there to like really take this person to the next level. I think how I've seen it in my mind and how I've kind of settled on my role inside of someone's training for like a fight is I'm the most important about 12 weeks out to about 6 weeks out, right? And then in regards to like training wise, right? The last 4 weeks I'm about load management, right? Like in my opinion, in regards to MMA, I'm the only place they can come in and we can manage their load effectively because I can adjust every single point from the warm up to the movements to the conditioning at every single point. It's really hard to manage wrestling and jujitsu and striking, especially like some of these sports, because it's like, hey, in jujitsu, I can say I want to go light until someone starts to wrap their arm around my neck, and I'm going to be like, well, I'm not getting choked, so I'm going to go hard. And then you start getting into these, scrambles and rolls, and it's like, all right, now I just, destroyed myself, right? I'm the only spot that they can come in, and from start to finish, everything can be auto regulated or adjusted or changed or managed so that they can get what they need in that moment. And that's it. Right. So with that being said, I think my sessions, and that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you can really make or break their session, but it's a curse because it's like, all right, well, like I said earlier, you kind of plan these sessions to get adaptation, and it's like, oh, well, it's just not going to work. Right. And I think the other thing to think about too, in regards to like actually building out these sessions is like, I think with some people, when they build out speed or peaking or power sessions, they kind of get lost in what's actually effective for the individual. So like, what can this person actually do with not only their skill level, right? Because that's such a huge part too, but what can they actually do like in that moment with their like physical abilities, right? So it's like a lot of people want to work on what's a good example that I can figure, like, like absolute speed, right? Like there's only a few ways to really train absolute speed, and it's really like sprinting, and you know there's not many more, right? And it's like if someone isn't able to fully execute on a sprint, then it's like we have to find other ways to kind of build that into the program. But what are the ways that we can kind of get around it, right? In regards to explosive work, like there again, kind of coming back to what I started this conversation with is like there's prereqs to getting to a certain point, and we just need to understand like what's the minimum effective dose for this, and what's the most bang for my buck with an individual that is in front of me. And especially when they're training for something where it's like, hey, at the end of the day, what's going to help them win this fight is training to fight, right? Like if they're not there training to fight, like it doesn't matter how much they bench, doesn't matter how good their cardio is, the game plan's not going to work, right? So my job is always and always will be to make sure when that person comes to me, they're getting all of the things they need covered so that they can go and train to fight and win, right? And I think my resume to this point, the people I've worked with, the amount of success we've had, I think everything has worked wonderfully, and I think these experiences and the way that I've also trained and kind of built everything has shown success. And I'm obviously always trying to pursue the highest level of that. And I think that as it comes, I'm always willing to change, and it's just this is what's worked for me so far. And I don't know. I think that hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it's
I know I didn't dive too much. I kind of like got into a lot of like bigger conceptual concepts about like peaking. If anybody does have any like specific questions or wants to see anything in particular, be more than happy to kind of share that either at a different time or in like a post or something like that, or a YouTube video. Because I wanted to kind of break down a little bit the differences between the three, but I think the way we talked about it today and the questions you asked too were important questions for kind of everyone to hear explained.
Yeah, and it's so good to still see the actual programming, because it's so easy, especially now, to get lost if you look at social media. And one reason that I feel like as we talked about, it's so easy to think that you should mimic your sport in the gym, and that would be the best strength and conditioning for that given sport. And one reason I think that's quite popular, it's so easy to understand.
Yeah.
If I look at, or it's also easier to sell as a coach, because
100%.
if I show you something that you as a client can feel like, oh, this looks like a golf swing, or this looks some like an element that's found in my sport, that's an easier sell. But if you're in it for the long run and really want to create sustainable results for your athletes, clients, the ones you work with, you need to put pride in thinking, okay, not just for the short term, but my job here is to build potential. And if I'm the strength and conditioning coach, my job is to build potential and hand over, when that time comes, the best potential, or an athlete with the characteristics needed to perform in the sport. And when you hand over, and when your kind of period of the year, or whatever, how you measure training and blocks, when you hand over them to maybe a sport specific coach, your job is to adapt, make them feel good, and do what you can to be a team player when it comes to a relation to other coaches. So it's again being going back to believe in your results, your methods, and don't get tempted to just mimic the sport because that's easier to sell.
Yeah.
You need to be confident enough to defend the principles, make sure to build the potential in the gym, and then hand over a competent athlete with the characteristics needed to perform. So
Yeah, and I think one of the things, it's funny you say that, is because like I've gotten, as I started training some of these guys, you know, it's a very alpha, mentality type sport where a lot of these guys are very like hard-headed, very like driven, very A-type personalities. And I've gotten a lot of I've caught a lot of flack essentially for training the way that I train these guys. And I've gotten a lot of people who are like, "Oh, this seems too easy. Like it's not enough. Like I'm not getting what I need." And they're 4 weeks out and they're the best they've ever felt. Their weight cut's the easiest it's ever been. They're physically there, they're mentally there. They're also enjoying their lives outside of it. And obviously we talked about that before where it's like, hey, how much of that do you give them to feel good as opposed to performing good? But I'm such a firm believer that if you manage the athlete properly and give them that time that they don't even know they need and the things that they don't even know they need, they're gonna fight better than they ever have in their life. And it doesn't matter really, so much the little, details of some of these things. That what matters is that like you manage their abilities, you make sure they're feeling good. And like I said, a lot of people have kind of looked at what I've done in the beginning. And they're are you sure this is enough? I feel like I'm not that tired. I feel like I should be more tired. I feel like this and that. And it's like, exactly. Like you don't want to be exhausted. You don't want to go into training and be like, I don't know if I can, because that's how injuries happen. And if you were, and like, this is my biggest gripe with MMA and my biggest gripe with training in MMA. It's a lot of single coaches who don't communicate and everybody wants to be the guy who brought success to the person. Right. And I think that if you really look at this as a whole, like fighting's an individual sport and you have to fit in. And I've had the luxury where the top people that I've trained, I've been around the sessions. I see the coaches. I see firsthand the sessions and how they look and how he is and how he's feeling. And I'm going to go up to the coaches being like, "Hey, what do you think? How do you think he is? What does he need more of? Do you see any faults in what's going on?" I'm able to ask that question. And I've been lucky to have people like Diego Lima when I was with Ian, or Amanda's head coach, Roger Crawl, or Ariani's head coach, Hanato, where it was like we were able to sit down, actually talk about, hey, this is who we're fighting. This is the game plan. This is what I'm looking to achieve. Where do you fit in with this? And I'm able to say, hey, here's what I think. This is what I saw the last camp. This is what I see in your training. I think we go this route, blah, 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 this and that, right? But there's so much singularity or almost negative individualism inside of MMA where it's like, I'm the coach of this and this is what we're doing. I'm the coach of this and this is what we're doing. And no one talks, no one tries to communicate. Everyone tries to do their own thing because it's a very like I said, individual sport. And then you butt heads and then you end up having this relationship of just fighting and fighting and fighting, or non-communication where it's like then the athlete suffers because they're not getting the best from each coach because no one's talking to anybody, right? And it's such a bad look that they have yet to really fix. I think it's getting better. And I think as more coaches like myself and other coaches that I know that are in strength conditioning that are kind of doing it on their own in regards to MMA, like I think a lot of these people are changing the tune on what it should look like and individually how it should look like, But I think hopefully that answers questions. Hopefully you guys got what you needed out of that. And yeah, because there's definitely a lot more that can be had about that conversation. But
Feels like we need a part 2 on this one.
yeah, there might be.
It's so good. I know I sent you guys in our little chat this morning the video with Daniel Cormier and Tom Brady on the champions mindset. There's so many good nuggets in there. I loved how Tom Brady talks, and he talks about this in a lot of other interviews, but just how he treated, every practice session, every play, every opportunity that he got to be on the field as it was in the game, and creating the elevated heart rate, creating all the intensity, celebrating like it was game day,
Yeah.
so that it prepared him for game day. So I know it'd be cool to dig into a lot of the mindset stuff that you guys work on athletes with to prepare them for those moments. And then the other thing that I was just thinking, and I'm sure Brandon, you creep on all these people too, because I just love studying the art of coaching and how people collaborate and work. And I love how in the OPEX community, we all collaborate just like you guys collaborate, but our team of ambassadors and the broader community at large collaborates. There's no ego, and everyone wants to support each other's development and support the development of the athletes that each other are working on. one example that I love in MMA is Trevor Whitman's camp and how he operates with his team of coaches. We're always watching. We're big Gaethje fans, so we watch all the vlogs, and I watch them more so less for Justin Gaethje, but more for Trevor Whitman's insights and just the way that he thinks about programming and how he coordinates all the programming of the coaches. So that I would love for us to do another one on this. That was awesome, guys.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
So cool. Okay, I did not highlight that the Q&A box was open, and y'all were light on the Q&A. And this episode was packed with what I think would prompt you with a ton of questions. So comment below this video if you have any questions for the guys. We'll keep dibs on this. And I don't know if we have a sneak peek of next week coming up yet, but we will be back next week.
Yes. I don't know if there's a sneak peek, but sneak peek is you'll find out next week.
Tune in next week. That's all I can say.
Thanks, guys. I hope you have a great day. Appreciate you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.